And I'd saved some money working part-time through all these years I was working part-time. I saved some money, and I got a plane ticket to California to enroll at the Ali Akbar College of Music. And they do 4 8-week sessions a year with the teacher, Maestro Ali Akbar Khan. Let me back up here and just tell you a little bit about him. He's a sarod player from this village area of Bengal called Maihar. And he is one of the most famous Indian classical musicians of the 20th century. His brother-in-law is Ravi Shankar, and Ravi Shankar and Ali Akbar Khan's teacher is Ali Akbar Khan's father, Alauddin Khan. The Ali Akbar College opened in 1968 in Berkeley and then moved to Marin County a few years after that. And at this point, I'd say it was around the year 2000. If he's born in 1922, then that would make him 78 years old, something like that. He's still performing. He's still in pretty good health. And he was pretty active as a teacher. I was kind of terrified going out there, not knowing anyone, finding some place on Craigslist to live. And, but it was exciting at the same time because it was the first time in my life I made at least, I won't say I took the plunge, but at least I got my foot wet, like for real, and devoted, at least 2-3 months to just learning music. And I really poured my heart and soul into trying to make the most of that opportunity. My days were spent practicing 12, 15 hours a day and really trying to learn as much as I could in the time I was there. I had so much to learn. And this instrument, the sitar, is so difficult and so complicated. And as hard as I worked, I barely scratched the surface. There's some kinds of artistic pursuits you can get really deep in a year or two. This is not one of them. It takes your whole life. But I was there for a session, and I came back, and it was kind of rejuvenated with how to move forward with this. And the focal point in my life from that point onward was always music. I understood I needed a job. I understood I needed to find some way to pay tuition and to travel out there. But that began a series of, I'd say, the next 7 years where I was working part-time in different sorts of jobs, but when I wasn't, I was either performing concerts, playing, recording music, and most of this at this point was kind of urban contemporary music, or I was performing as an Indian classical musician. And around here in Raleigh, around that time, there was a number of venues that were like art galleries and places that weren't just like smoky bars that I could perform this. It's kind of a music you don't want to play in a smoky bar. It's more traditional and there's meditative aspects. And there were also yoga centers and places like that I started to look at, and coffee shops as well. And so, yeah, maybe performed hundreds of those kinds of concerts over those years, and tried to go back as regularly as I could to study with my teacher, who I call Kansab. And in going there to the school, there were many other students of all tiers of accomplishment. And so you kind of got paired up with a senior student, and sometimes you got paired up with multiple students that were kind of there to help you. My teacher was had his hands full, and the majority of my training with my teacher was in group. It was not private lessons. But a lot of these people helped light the path. And the director of my college, he understood I was on the East Coast a lot. He said, there's a lady in New York who's the founder of this school, and she's a very good sitarist. You should go and try to seek her out. And around that time I did, and her name is Daisy Parody. And she took me and really gave me so much one-on-one attention. If there were two people that were out of the college that really helped me during this time, it was her and my private teacher at the school, James Pomerantz. And they're both very supportive of making this a lifelong effort and possibly a profession. I think with a lot of music educators, you know, it's kind of like you don't want to tell your students, hey, you could do this for a living. Sometimes parents will freak out. And especially this kind of music, playing traditional ethnic music, there's not a lot of cake. But there is ways you can do it. And it's a kind of a classical enough art form. It requires a full-time amount of attention and effort. So through Daisy, I began taking the bus up to New York, maybe in 2001, and she had an apartment in the Upper East, or well, yeah, Upper East Side around Hunter College, and she had two sitar teachers around this time, maybe between 2001 and 2004, that she exposed me to, who I'm lucky enough, I still learn from these guys. And their names are Pandit Krishna Mohan Bhatt and Pandit Partha Chatterjee. Krishna Ji lives in the Upper West Side of New York part of the year, and in a city in India called Jaipur. And Partha Da means like your respected kind of term. Partha Da lives in Calcutta and teaches at the Sangeet Research Academy. He lives there full time. And that's one of the more prestigious organizations promoting Indian classical music in India. So I still, at this point, I had multiple teachers aside from Ali Akbar Khan. Ali Akbar Khan, maybe around 2005, 2006, retired from performing, and he was kind of in ill health. He was he had to plug into dialysis. He was well into his 80s, and he still taught, but you know, sometimes I'd try to go out there and he just would be sick. And it was just one of those things. I kind of understood that my time was his time was kind of coming to an end. He ended up passing away in 2009. I regret I didn't have more time with him. I regret that I couldn't have spent more time at the school. But around that point, you know, some other teachers were, I don't know, I kind of took a break from taking class and kind of just was more in a reflective mode. Just want to back up a little bit and talk about what happened to me in my college career. And after I, you know, kind of dropped out my sophomore year, I started going back to school part-time, 1 or 2 classes a semester, and ended up finishing school in about 5.5 years with a biochemistry degree and a chemistry degree. And I was applying for jobs. At the time, I was an AV tech at a convention center. And I was not really finding any opportunities to work locally in Raleigh anywhere. And I had a friend of mine who was an Indian classical drummer. The drum is called the tabla. And he worked for a company that would go to construction sites and make inspections of the air units and things like that. And he got me a job with him. And so for 1.5 years after college, I was just traveling all around the country with him. He'd take his tabla, I'd take my sitar, and when we check out into our hotel room after our work shift, we'd just play for a couple hours, and it was a great partnership. And his name was Chris Johnson, and him and I are still friends today, and we don't play as much together. He's found other interests and is not really that involved in playing tabla anymore. But it was fun to have, like I was saying earlier, just a friend that plays music like you do, and and you are motivated and inspired by one another's company. We played a lot in clubs and private parties and weddings and those that kind of tier of performances where sometimes we were background music. Sometimes we weren't. Sometimes we played at a old vaudeville theater in Danville, Virginia for 3,000 people one time. We had good gigs too, um, but it was an amazing time. Maybe about a year and a half into that, I found a job as a chemist in Wilson. And so I moved into another place in Raleigh that was kind of closer to Wilson. Uh, Also living with other musicians and did that job till just for 9 months. And I ended in around December of '05. And that was about the end of the last time I ever took a job that wasn't a music job. And so I kind of say '05 as my start as a professional musician. And I didn't really have much income at the time. I was playing a gig at an Indian restaurant a couple nights a week and playing in clubs as well with my other groups. But it was enough to pay rent. And maybe 6 or 7 months into it, one of the patrons at the restaurant was like, "Hey, I really want to learn this thing. Will you teach me?" And it was my first student. He was an NC State grad student. His name was Jason. And within like 2 years, I had 5 or 6 students, and it was just a wonderful kind of supplemental thing to just performing. And that ratio of like professionally what you're doing to be a professional, is always changed. Sometimes it's 90% performing, 10% teaching. Some like these days, it's all teaching. It has to be. And there are those out there that aren't as fortunate that are they gotta have to do these online concerts and try to fundraise and I've patroned those things and have all the respect in the world for those people. But I was very lucky enough to kind of diversify in this way and always had at least 5 or 6 students and some performance income. And so, yeah, I'd say from '05 to 2010, I was always playing every week somewhere. I was learning. I was traveling 2 or 3 times a year to meet with somebody to learn sitar. Um, and one of my big regrets was I didn't spend more time with Ali Akbar Khan at the end of his life. I did make it out there for after he passed and spent some time out there. But my relationship with the West Coast changed after 2009. After he was gone, I still went out there. My sister lives out there, but it wasn't as regular. It wasn't a yearly thing anymore. And New York kind of became a focal point. I had reasons in my personal life at that time and also my professional life to kind of focus in New York. And started teaching out there in New York probably around 2012, 2011. And at that time, I met my next teacher, who was a maestro of the sarangi. It's an Indian violin. It's very complicated, and it's one of the older Indian classical instruments still in use today. His name is Pandit Ramesh Mishra, and he lived in Queens. And I got to the point I was taking weekly lessons from him for about 5 or 6 years. And so that meant me going on a bus to New York every week and still doing gigs in Raleigh. That period from 2010 to 2016 was like a dual life of having an apartment here, having an apartment there, having roommates, having a lot of flux, having a lot of money problems, trying to pay as much time as I could to professional growth. But I felt like I was doing it all in once. I was learning, I was teaching, I was playing, I was doing it. It was like looking back, it was an amazing time, and I'm glad that I could do it, but I really needed 5 of me to try to do the things I was trying to do then. Um, but this gentleman, Ramesh Mishra, is an amazing person. Um, I thought I was going to go to, when I met him, I thought he was going to teach me how to be a good violinist. Instead, he did teach me that. He taught me how to be a good musician, but he also just taught me how to be a better person. He was just the sweetest kind of person. Um, and not to stereotype musicians or anything like that. There are many others like him, but he was different than other musicians I met. Really, just supportive of everyone. And he made contributions in all fields of Indian classical art, from dance to vocal music to tabla to his own solo performance in promoting the sarangi. I did not play his instrument. I learned an instrument called the dilruba, which is also kind of complicated, maybe a 22 string instrument. And his might be more strings, maybe 28 strings, something like that. And over time, I adapted what I learned on that instrument to play another bowed instrument called the esraj. So I play a few Indian classical instruments at this point. Um, Guruji Guruji is what I call Ramesh Mishra. He had diagnosed with esophageal cancer, and he was doing chemo, maybe 2014, 2013, 2012 to 2014, and he kind of beat it. And when he got out of chemo, he was performing, and his life was different. You know, he had some physical disabilities. He took time for his esophagus to heal and things like that. But one of the things that resulted from the chemo was part of his vertebrae got fused, and he had a number of other surgeries and health problems after that. He ended up passing away in 2017 in March, and it was a surprise to all of us when that happened. He is survived by his wife and son, Rohan Mishra and Maya Mishra. And I Skype with them or FaceTime with them still every week. We're like family. And after Guruji passed away, I started learning from his wife, who's a dancer. She's teaching me aspects of Indian rhythmic cycles. And also she's teaching me a little Bengali on the side. Yeah, it was amazing. All the musicians that admired Guruji, and he played with everybody. He was a student of Ravi Shankar, and he got his visa through Ravi Shankar ji, trying his efforts to bring that caliber artists to the U.S. And I still try to play with his son, and we try to play over. We're using, what is it called, the Google Hangouts to play. But yeah, so there are all these musicians that are in my life, and at this point, so many have passed. Ali Akbar Khan, Guruji, and my teacher James Pomerantz that I mentioned earlier passed away too. James sold me a giant bass sitar a few years before he passed. And he sold me for an affordable price, and it's called a Surbahar. And I've been learning how to play that thing for now 10 years. And I very rarely play it out, but I consider it one of my stronger skills. It's kind of a personal instrument. For a while, I didn't even have a car to move it in. It was so big, maybe 6 feet long case. It's kind of it's heavy. So it ended up just being something I played for my personal enjoyment a lot.